Hey everyone, TinMan here with another patch rundown. Today we're going to be talking about patch 1.28.7, some balance changes that include some nerfs to some pretty heavily played cards, as well as some buffs to some much lesser played cards. Overall, I'm pretty lukewarm on a lot of these changes. I think their mind is in the right place, they're targeting the right cards, but I think a lot of them are, um, they're not the changes I would have made to the cards. And I think they're focusing a little bit too much on kind of this exact snapshot of the meta right here today, this week, and not really thinking about the big picture of the way the meta has developed since the most recent patch changes of 1.28, and where the meta is going to be going in the next few weeks. I think they're focused a little bit too much on the present, and I think that's going to come back to bite them in a couple weeks. So let's hop right into it. First off, the Elysian Pathfinder and Elysian Trailblazer have been nerfed to high hell. They were 5 time and 5 primal. This was actually a nerf from when they were just 5 time and 5 primal. Now they dropped them up to 7, added triple color requirements, and these cards are just completely unplayable at this point in any kind of competitive setting. And I think that's by design. I think they just wanted to get these Echo Mocto type decks just completely out of the meta until they can print more cards that are reasonable ways to interact with them. I can kind of respect that in that, they're putting this on hold. They will say that they're going to come back to this. They're going to come back to this nerf and maybe revert it once they release more tools. The problem is, I don't even think it's a problem right now. Perhaps it's just where I'm playing up in high master tier. I really don't see very much Echo Mocto. Maybe that's different in lower tiers. Maybe it's much more popular there. But even when I do see Echo Mocto, I'm very unimpressed with it compared to more standard versions of just removal pile Mocto decks. So I don't think this nerf is necessary, but I can understand where they're coming from for it. That it is uninteractive, and that as they release more interaction for it, they might revisit it. So I won't necessarily fault them for this one. The Vara Fate Touch nerf is another weird one here. So now Vara does not trigger off of herself, essentially. So this is a huge nerf. I mean, not only do you lose the card advantage of getting the card back, but you also lose the mana or the power efficiency of just being able to cast a card. So it's not as if, oh, it used to draw, if it was a card draw spell, for instance. It's not as though, oh, it used to draw 3, now it only draws 2. No, it's more along the lines of like Channel the Tempest, who draws 3 and then deals damage. It's more like it draws less and then does less damage. It's kind of a double whammy, which I think honestly puts this card into close to unplayable range, if not completely unplayable. Which is unfortunate. The card's very iconic in the Eternal lore. It's definitely a focal point of one of the campaigns. Obviously, she's one of the Scions. And one of the Scions who's actually, I would say, more popular than, say, like Talir or Island or Roland or Caleb to an extent. Probably the most popular Scion. So I feel a little bit bad from like a lore perspective, but from a purely gameplay perspective, I don't think she was that much of a problem. I mean, I felt bad whenever the opponent got, a big Vara chain, possibly with Grasping Shadows, where it goes Vara into Vara into Vara into whatever. But I actually, the more I think about it, my main problem was the into whatever. That last card that they brought back, whether it be a Snow Crushed Animist or a Black Sky Harbinger, was generally the real death knell in that chain, at least for an aggressive deck perspective. As an aggressive deck, if they just put out a couple blockers, you think, okay, I need to kill them quick, and they've got a couple blockers. Whether or not they're 6/6 Varas or if they're 1/1 Grenadine drones, all I care about is how many blockers do you have, how many attackers do I have, how low is your life total. And whenever they get to res a Snow Crush Animist or a Black Sky Harbinger, that math goes out the window because I can't attack anymore. Because they either gained a bunch of life and have a lifesteal unit, or all my guys are just dead or stunned. So I think I have more of a problem with the Snow Crushed Animist Black Sky Harbinger as an aggressive deck perspective. And when I say aggressive deck, I don't mean just pure aggro decks. I mean any kind of deck that wants to be aggressive. That can include Sandstorm Titan decks. That can include Argenport mid-range decks. Decks that want to be having guys on the board and attacking with them. I think a lot more of the problem comes from those other payoff cards in addition to the chained Varas. in an ideal world, I would have liked to see Vara be something of unique or like legendary in Magic terminology, where you can only ever have one Vara out at a time. But unfortunately, that would require a full system revamp for a card that I think is not a huge problem. I think she's slightly overtuned, slightly too strong, but all things being said, I don't think this nerf was warranted. I would have been perfectly fine if she was not nerfed, and definitely not to the degree that she was nerfed. She's kind of a weird case though, because many of the more traditional ways of nerfing a card involve increasing the power cost, reducing its stats, increasing the influence requirement. None of them are really applicable to the way Vara is typically played, either by reanimated with Grasping at Shadows, or just whenever a Feln-based control deck has tons of mana in the late game and all they care about is the value from her. So nerfing her to, say, a 5/5 doesn't really nerf her at all. I don't think would have any noticeable effect. Similarly, adding one power to her doesn't affect the reanimate target. Adding an extra influence is just silly. It doesn't matter. So really, their only avenue of nerfing the card was kind of what they did, and unfortunately, I think it's a little too heavy-handed, which is really unfortunate for a card like this. So moving on to Soulfire Drake, this is the one I'm personally the most upset about, primarily because I like playing red-based aggro decks, and I just crafted 2 of these a couple days ago. Hopefully I'll get a full refund for them anyway, so that's beside the point. But this nerf, I think, is misguided in a lot of ways. They specifically say that the changes to Steward of the Past has led it to run away in the 5-drop spot. That's not true. Steward of the Past was part of the equation, but I think a bigger deal was the nerf to Dawnwalker, which reduced the popularity of Sandstorm Titan decks, and Sandstorm Titan has naturally been the enemy of Soulfire Drake because, well, not only does he prevent flying, Sandstorm Titan comes on a turn earlier and is just big enough to block the Soulfire Drake. So Sandstorm Titan decks are the natural predators of Soulfire Drake, and with the decrease in popularity there, it led to an uptick in Soulfire Drake. Additionally, with the other shifts in the meta based on the changes to those, to Stonepowder Alchemist and Argenport Instigator, reduced the dependence on Argenport midrange and more in this 3-colored like Jund midrange or removal pile type decks, which also naturally are weak to charge units like Soulfire Drake and the charge units he presents. So all of those factors kind of came together into making Soulfire Drake extremely strong in the meta right now, but I think he's just strong right now. I think if you give the meta another couple weeks to develop and keep on churning as it does, Soulfire Drake will stop being quite as dominant in the meta as we see it right now. I think this is a case of it's the best card and the best deck right now, but it's not overbearing in such a way that requires a nerf. I think if you give the meta a couple weeks to sort itself out and to continue to progress, you won't see Soulfire Drake being quite as dominant as it is. So I think it's a little bit short-sighted and doesn't really understand the full history of why this card was so good at the time right now. So let's move on to Protect. This is a nerf I can definitely get behind. Protect, exactly like they say, it's too versatile, it's too efficient, it's too effective against everything. One cost to hit a unit or your avatar, or remove their Aegis from their unit. It was just doing way too much. I think an acceptable nerf would have been keep it at 1, but only let it target your units. So you can't use it to remove an Aegis from an opponent. You can't use it to give yourself Aegis. I think that would be an acceptable nerf, but this nerf is is arguably makes it much worse of a card. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think having too many protects running around makes the game a little less fun, a little less enjoyable. It feels less interactive. I know you're going to say, oh, this is an interactive card, but it feels like if you're on the receiving side of Protect, you're like, all right, well, I've been saving this one removal spell for his one big threat, and he counters it for 1 power. It's really a feel-bad kind of moment that you don't feel like you could have played around. Like, you couldn't have saved 2 removal spells for it, but you could have saved 1. So you get punished even for making a objectively good decision. Where the better, like, if they're holding exactly 1 Protect, you should just blow that removal spell as soon as they tap out, possibly on a lower priority target. And so that creates a lot of feel bad moments, even when you're, you know, kind of properly holding your removal spells. So I'm totally fine with this nerf. Wanted poster, I've been on the receiving side of this card a lot, which definitely makes me feel bad about it. I honestly wish this card was just never printed in the first place. I just wish that they'd left card draw to be in the domain of Primal primarily, and then Time to a lesser extent, because they have cards like Ancient Knowledge or Ancient Lore and Vault of the Praxis. But unfortunately, it was printed, so they have to keep it out there. It does fit thematically, right? You know, Justice is about law and order, and to that extent, you've got wanted posters and bounties and stuff like that. But unfortunately, it's a conditional draw cards, but the condition is often trivial. It's too trivial, specifically because Justice is already the faction of removal, along with Shadow. But the problem is that Shadow and Justice so often intersect. I mean, Justice has Vanquish, they've got Harsh Rule, they've got Auric Runehammer, they've got Slay. They just have a lot of the premium constructed quality removal cards, whereas Shadow might have more total. Justice has the more constructed quality ones. And it's kind of a moot point because they're often paired together. So to that extent, I don't think Wanted Poster is really a conditional removal card, as it is a more of a formality against most decks. Just pay 1 extra on your removal spell to get to draw 2. And for that, I think it was a little too universally applicable. Additionally, Justice has been the best faction in the game at the moment, not only in draft, but in constructed, you know, with Recano Aggro being top dog, the removal pile decks, obviously running Fire, Shadow, and Justice, and a lot of the other mid-rangey, like Combre decks are up on the rise too, which also run Justice. So I think a lot of these removal type decks will still play Wanted Poster. They're not going to be happy about it, but they'll still play it because it's their only option to card draw outside of Time or Primal. And I think that's fine from a metagame perspective. I think Justice needs a nerf, and I think this is a nerf that you can give to Justice. That being said, I really want to reiterate, I just wish this card had never been printed. I wish this was just not a question. I wish that these type of effects were perhaps given just to Primal and Time. Another possible nerf I would have considered for Wanted Poster would be to have a kind of delay on it. You know, you can't cash in that bounty until your next turn. Although I'm not sure exactly how the wording or like templating on the cards would work on that. Something like, at the start of your next turn, the attached unit gains. When this dies, you draw 2. It's just real confusing. And it would be confusing to read, confusing to play with, confusing for probably to program into the system. So given that, you know, I'm happy that Wanted Poster got nerfed from a balanced perspective on the meta to nerf Justice. Stonepowder Alchemist. This card should have stayed at 4 cost. I don't agree with the 3 cost buff. It was a very substantial buff, as they say. I don't think this nerf is particularly applicable to a lot of the meta decks right now. You know, not a lot of the meta decks run 1 damage, you know, damage in packets of 1, whether from 1 power units or 1 damage cards. They're just not very prevalent. So this is effectively, you know, the same for all intents and purposes against many of the meta decks. However, if a Grenadine deck does pop up, more on that in a little bit, or other token-based decks that rely on having 1/1s, this is a substantial nerf. And it's certainly welcome. I wish they would just thrown it back to 4 cost. It was a fine role player in certain deck types at 4 cost. I don't see a reason they had to go to 3, but they did, and so any nerf is welcome, even if it's not enough. The changes to some Justice cards in draft, Entrapment, Spiritblade Stalker, and Roostinel are welcome. I mean, they're fine. Justice is still the best faction in constructed and in draft. Unfortunately, I think most of their power stems from having flyers. Flyers are very strong in draft, in limited formats, and Justice has the best flyers. That's why they're the best faction. So these nerfs are fine. I mean, they're, you know, I'm not going to say no to them, but I don't think they're really understanding the heart of why Justice is so powerful in draft. These don't really address that to any extent. I would have liked to see more changes to other factions to buff them up to, you know, increase their ability to deal with flyers rather than just nerf Justice cards. Last Light Druid used to be meme tier, still meme tier. Nothing much to talk about here. These other buffs, just kind of thrown in here at the end with no explanation. I actually like pretty much all of them, except for the last little bunch. These first two, Into the Furnace and Topple Tower, these are Grenadine cards. A big buff to Into the Furnace, making it a fast spell. It's now in the Grenadine deck, essentially a 2-cost deal 4 to a unit fast, which is huge compared to deal 4 at slow speed. You can hit all those pesky charge units. It can help you be tempo, mana efficient. To get tempo, hold up 2 power and know you have an instant other than just Torch in your deck. All around, I think Into the Furnace buff will make some Grenadine decks come back into the fold. Topple Tower is yet to be seen if this is still going to be a reasonable card in these Grenadine decks, but I am happy to brew and look for some decks from me in the near future, like TinMan's, TinMen, the Grenadines. Look for a deck like that in the near future. This bunch here, Amaranth Shoveler down to Parapet Sentry, are just kind of all buffs to the Praxis kind of cards, Time and Fire. I think as a whole, these are welcome changes. I mean, obviously all these cards are pretty much unplayable currently in Constructed. Whether or not all of these will see play in a Constructed deck, doubtful. But the Stirring Sands buff, the Reliquary Raider, and possibly the Parapet Sentry changes make a Praxis Sentinel type deck much more interesting. I still think they have the fundamental problem that they can't deal with large units. They can torch something, or they can play a bigger unit of their own. If you play something that can't be torched and can't be made bigger, well, Praxis can't really deal with it. They don't have unconditional removal spells, or like I guess they do have some bounce effects, so like a Praxis Displacer. But other than that, they don't have straight up kill spells. So that's still going to be a weakness of theirs. And depending on how the meta shifts, whether that weakness is exploitable or not, will depend. I will say, though, if with all these buffs to power and making things cost lower, maybe the deck just becomes fast enough that it can ignore those big threats. I'm not entirely convinced. I don't think this will be nearly as fast as, say, Rakano or Stone Scar aggro, but you never know. That could be a way around its weakness to just go fast. Belly and Thunderfoot, okay, it's slightly more playable in draft now. Not going to be constructed playable. Thudrock Arctic Artisan is a huge buff. It is now no longer weak to Torch, and that, along with Iceberg Warchief buff, does make Yetis much more interesting. Of course, now Warchief is now weak to Torch, which is a little awkward. But I think on the whole now we might see a kind of mid-rangey, like an aggressive mid-rangey Yeti deck pop up. Whether or not it'll be better than traditional Skycrag aggro, I doubt it. But maybe it fills a different metagame niche. Maybe it goes a little bit bigger, a little bit later, has a bit more staying power than just, balls to the walls aggro. Then there's the set of changes I don't like here. Amethyst Monument, Cabal Slasher, Eye and the Abductor, and Mask of Torment. All of these are kind of life force based cards. I don't like these buffs. I think due to the nerf to Soulfire Drake, well, I think the meta is already shifting towards countering red aggro decks. So red aggro decks are currently the best deck. And I think in the next week or two, people will start playing more life force type decks to counter them, or they would have, given a natural metagame cycle. And then these cards would have come back into the fold anyway. Well, at least I and the Abductor would have. Maybe the other three wouldn't have. But a Xenon Life Force deck might have come back into the fold anyway. Now we're just buffing and substantially buffing some of these cards. Like Amethyst Monument is a substantial buff. Doesn't die to Torch. It does 1 more damage. It heals 1 more. Cabal Slasher just minus a cost on it is huge. And I am the Abductor is a small buff. Mask of Torment still probably not playable. But these changes are just, they come back to what I said before, but I think they're too short-sighted. They see what the metagame is right now, today, this week, and they don't think, well, where was the metagame a couple weeks ago? Where is it going to be in a couple weeks? They just see right now and are too short-sighted to really understand the past and predict the future of the way the metagame is going to adjust. This game isn't so big. We don't have such a huge player base that the metagame is just solved within a few weeks and it's stabilized within a few weeks. We have a smaller player base. We have a smaller content creator base. So the metagame moves more slowly than in a game like, or not, maybe it doesn't move, but it stabilizes a lot slower than a game like Magic or Hearthstone, where you have, you know, exponentially more people playing it, more people playing more games, the metagame stabilizes, and all the best decks are found out faster. I think if we had given this metagame a little bit more time to develop, we would have seen these cards, or at least Eye and the Abductor, played a bit more, and we would have seen Soulfire Drake played a little bit less. So unfortunately, I think the developers are stepping in right now and kind of forcing that change, which I think would have been natural on its own. And for that, I'm a little bit upset. I don't think that's the correct way to handle a metagame. But I think they should have given it a bit more time before they made some of those specific changes. Some of the other changes I'm perfectly okay with, specifically the, you know, Protect, Wanted Poster, Alchemist, to an extent Vara. I think she was a bit too strong, but I guess if that's the only way they can nerf it, it's the only way they can nerf it. And then most of these other changes to kind of buff up Grenadines, Sentinels, and Yetis, I think are interesting changes that'll provide us some interesting brewing, you know, material for the next couple days or next couple weeks. So that's all for the patch 1.28.7 balance changes. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please do drop a like and a follow if you appreciate this type of content. You can check out all my other deck tech videos, gameplay, all that kind of stuff. It really helps me out. You can also check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/TinMan354 to check out, to chat with me about this kind of stuff, or just check out my stream most weekdays and weekends. Thanks so much for watching, guys. See you later.